Two things. If you can mention in the chat that you can hear me clearly, that would be helpful. I'll move the mic a bit closer. And the other thing is, I'll just apologize now if for parts of the video you end up staring at the top of my bald head, because I'm looking at the screen below here and the camera's up there for part of it. Thanks, David. Yeah, but the hair went a long time ago, and believe it or not, it used to be down to my waist. So short-lived, I'd say it was. So I think we'll just jump straight in rather than mess around. I do have a few slides. I think there's 11 of them, so don't worry. It's not really that kind of webinar where I bore you with presentation. Really what I want to do is just sort of give you an overview of how we think at Macanta and how we think about Macanta, and then a quick brief overview of a Macanta instance, just referencing the things that I'll mention in the slides, and then it's really over to your questions. I think it's more interesting if I can answer some of your questions rather than try and just show you where to click in the app, which there are lots of other videos for, and we have support that you can ask. So I'll get going. I'm also assuming that you can all see my screen. Where, as you might have worked out, it's the first time we're using this piece of webinar software, but it appears to be working really well. So that is me and the reason I wake up in the morning, and why we're building Macanta and what it should facilitate. So it's my wife Sophie and my two daughters Amelie and Olivia, and we're big rugby fans, so that's actually at Twickenham in England's National Rugby Stadium, just a few weeks ago, not long after Christmas I think it was, where we had a fab time. So why Macanta? Sort of two answers to this. Why do we think Macanta should exist? And as a business and as people, we strongly believe that the world would be a better place if every human can deliver their highest value, be that at work, at home, in their life in general. And I talk a lot, and I wrote in a book I published a few years ago about the cancer of 2-minute tasks that every business is suffering from. And we feel that Macanta is, for us, the best way to help alleviate that by eliminating and or automating as much of the sort of almost, in some extent, drudgery work that people need to do to free them up to actually deliver real value, both to customers and to the business itself. So brings us on to sort of 3 key concepts within Macanta that I just want to cover off, where from our perspective, Macanta is quite different to most CRMs, outside of the fact that we come with a customization, configure it yourself approach right from the ground up. It's also some other aspects that we'll touch on where we feel we differentiate and take a different approach. The first concept is the idea of data objects. So most CRM systems, you have a contact and you have their details. You might have companies and deals, and it's sort of, well, here's sales, and that's what you're left with. You can add loads of custom fields potentially to the contact, but the issue that you have there is the fact that there is often other information that's not contact information that you need to keep track of and be able to run processes and automation and workflows and things around. So let's just look at a couple of examples. So on the left-hand side, we have a cat and a dog. And for instance, if you were a vet, then you never treat the people you speak to. And the reminders in your workflow and the history of appointments always really relate to the animals. Yes, there is a person who rings you up, who is the pet owner, and who brings them in and who you have to email and communicate with. But it's always about this other piece of information, this other set of data. And the same way, let's say, for instance, you're running a car servicing garage. In our house, we've got 2 cars. So for the local garage to keep track of servicing and MOTs and everything, yes, there are contacts and I drop the car off, but they need to keep track of when the car's MOT or service is due, not my MOT or service, because I can sell the car and then it's not relevant anymore, or I can buy an additional car and then they have a new set of dates to keep track of. So that's really an easy way to think about these data objects. In insurance, it's the policy, and I am the if you look at car insurance, I am the main driver, I am the owner of the car, and therefore I'm the policy holder. But the information on the policy isn't my information. It's a separate piece of information. So that's how we think about the data sets in Macanta, and that's where the data objects come from. Moving on from that, the next key concept to grasp in Macanta is the relationships. So like I've alluded to, I have a relationship to pets. So whilst we've lived in the area we're living in now, we've had 3 cats and 1 bearded dragon, no dogs. But our relationship to those pets is that we are the pet owners, for lack of a better phrase. And at our local vet, they know the pets by name, they know their date of birth, everything, vaccination history, all of that. And they then have that my relationship to that animal is that I'm the pet owner, and therefore they can drive automation and workflows about the pet to the related contact based on that relationship. And the same with the car, that I am the car owner, therefore when the MOT or the service is due, the email comes to me because I am the car owner. The same with insurance again on a car. The main policyholder gets emailed about the renewal, not the additional drivers, because they have a different relationship. And Macanta allows you to do the same thing, which we'll come on to in the automation. So I mentioned earlier that we also look differently with automation compared to most other CRMs is the fact that with most CRMs, it's the contact that drops into a campaign. And let's say you want to send an email and then send another one 3 days later. The contact drops in, triggers the email, and then sits and waits in the campaign for 3 days and then triggers an email. And if you want to avoid that email being triggered, then you've got to take them out of the campaign, apply a tag or some mechanism to remove them from that campaign or drop them somewhere else, whatever it is. With Macanta, we completely look at automation as a true if this, then that process. And it's very much based on the data states and the relationships. So if we look at an example here, if we go back to the pet owner and the animals, you create the automation in your Macanta system by, on a technical level, what you're really doing is building SQL queries. So you would say to Macanta, if the pet type is cat and the last vaccination date is minus 11 months, so 11 months ago, and the next appointment date is less than today, meaning they don't have an appointment in the future, then send the vaccination reminder email 1, for instance. And then the same with the dog. If the pet type is dog and the last vaccination date is 24 weeks, let's say dogs need to be, in my example, dogs need to be vaccinated more frequently than cats. I don't know, I'm not a vet. But mine is 24 weeks, so 24 weeks ago. And the next appointment date again is less than today. Then send vaccination reminder email 1. So you can see there that because the data set is different and we're saying that the pet type is dog, what we're able to do there is that if the data object representing the cat has a last vaccination date of 24 weeks ago, nothing will happen because the pet type is cat, not dog. So you can specify down to quite a granular level what you want to do there. If we look at the car as an example again, you can say if the last service date is minus 11 months and the next appointment date is less than today, then send the service reminder email 1. And then we can go again a bit later if the last service date is minus 50 weeks, so just shy of a year, and the next appointment date again is less than today, so nothing in the future, send service reminder email 2. And what that allows for is that if the data value changes, so let's say it is 49 weeks and 6 days, and on that day I book an appointment for the following week, this email 2 just won't go out, because when it comes to the state of minus 50 weeks, yes, my last service date will be minus 50 weeks, but my next appointment date will now not be less than today because I've made an appointment for next week, and therefore this email is just not triggered. So it's a slightly different approach where we just scan the data to see does it meet the criteria. So with that, I'm going to jump into the interface, but just before I do, if you can just tell me in the chat at this point while I grab some water, do you have any questions? Not yet from David. Okay, so I'll keep an eye on those. If you have any, please jump in. And they don't have to just be about what I'm about to show you. If you have any general questions that you've arrived here with from having a look at Macanta, then please give us a shout on that as well. So what I'm going to do now is attempt to share my screen. And that looks as if I'm doing it. So I'm assuming now you can see this test Macanta app. So when you first log into Macanta as a non-configured, if you've got a template, it's slightly different, but a non-configured app, you'd only have a My Tasks widget. So the key thing to remember with what I might show you here is that 99% of it doesn't exist when you first log in if you've got a blank app, because you configure what you want. We don't sort of assume and put stuff in the way for you to only have to get rid of or change. So just as a brief overview, the widgets, you create the queries based on relationships, data object types, and then the data set. Very much like the automation works, you can say, well, someone should be in a query based on particular details. That gets them into your dashboard. And then if we just go in there, it gives you quick access where you can view. It's showing you a combination of the contact that has a particular relationship to the data object, and then the selected data object fields that you've said in your configuration you want in the results display. So if we just start from the left, we can see here that Erwin, his relationship to the data object that got into this result is that he is the key contact. So right now this says active opportunities, and we can go and look in a moment what the criteria is for an active opportunity and where that is set. But for the moment, this is an active opportunity. We've got an opportunity title and description here, and I can, if I click on the gray icon here with the arrow, that'll open Erwin's record, and take me away from my list. So if you've got a whole list here of opportunities or whatever the data object type is, you can quickly work through them without needing to load contacts and go in and out, because you can just view it here. Because you can either load the contact, which will take you away from here, or you can just access the contact here, which gives you the ability to edit the contact as you need to, but you don't lose your place. So if I know had another one, I can look at the next one, carry on. Same way, I've got inline editing, very much like a spreadsheet, where I can make changes if I need to. I can send emails direct from here. If there was a phone number, then an SMS icon would come up as well, and I can send details that way. So I could update things here if I wanted to. And then I can also view the full details of the opportunity. So not just the initial fields that I've said should be in a result, but actually the full details, with viewing the additional information on who's got what relationship to the particular data object. So here you can see I'm the sales rep, Erwin's the key contact. So any emails going out, reminders, confirmations, anything should go to the key contact in my automation, goes to Erwin. But then creating tasks and in-app reminders will be based around the sales rep relationship, so that it's created for whoever has that relationship. I can add notes to my data object, and I can also add file attachments. And you've got same access to notes, relationships, and attachments. You also have the ability to send an email from here, including data object merge values. You can see the history, which will then show you what automation ran, what condition, triggered what action, for which contact, what date and time. Any data changes, you can see what was changed, what field changed from what to what, and for which contact, and was it a logged in user who did it, or was it automation and the system made that change? And the same with relationship history. So you've got quite good sort of fallback if you want to see what happened and what didn't, who changed what. You've got that kind of detail there. And then obviously if you have permission to delete, you can delete. So that's just a quick overview on there. If we do actually go over to Erwin, we can look at the actual full contact record here, where you've got the option to add notes and tasks. Here we can decide which one we're doing. And to clarify, these notes are notes on Erwin's record, not the opportunity. When I go into the opportunity and I add notes, they are then added to the opportunity, which means even if I look through sort of the lens of a different contact, so if I go to this contact here and I go to opportunities, I can see that same opportunity. And if there were notes, then I'd see those notes in the same place. So I don't have to find the one contact for that. And obviously adding new items and such. And then also you have the option to have contact-to-contact relationships. So Erwin has no direct relationships, and direct relationship is a contact to a contact. So for instance, you can have a parent and child, or you can have a manager and a staff member, depending on what those relationships are, husband and wife, whatever you need to have. Those are direct relationships. You decide what the available relationships are, and then you set them up here. The indirect relationships, you can see Erwin has an indirect relationship with me, and that's because we share a data object, and I'm the sales rep on that data object. So you can see, let's say you've got companies that you work with, and there are 4 or 5 people at the company that you in different departments that you deal with. You'll see them all here when you look at one of the contacts, because they'll all be connected to the same company object, and therefore you can see those indirect relationships and see who else is involved in a deal or in a company, anything like that. So to go and look at the admin side, so we said we had the active opportunity here. So let's go and look what criteria this object had to meet in order to be in that list. So if we go into the admin section here, I go into my query builder, and there I can see my queries, which is how I build the widgets for the dashboard. So I can go in here, and here we can see that its active opportunity is opportunities. And then we've got our criteria is quite simple here. The opportunity stage is, and we've got these 4 selected. And it's an or rule. So if it's in one of those 4, then it will meet the criteria. And I'm saying, well, whose contact relationship do I want to see? I want to see the key contact. I'm not setting a user relationship, but you do have the option to say, well, show them for a particular user, or show the leads or the objects, whatever they are in your setup, for the logged in user. What that allows you to do is, let's say it is a sales environment, you can have it so that when a user logs in, they only see their own leads. They don't see someone else's because they don't have a relationship to it. And then we can choose here, well, which fields do we want to see in the results? And that then gives us that. And then this widget is already on the dashboard, and I'm out of widgets. But normally you would then go add widget and then choose which one you want to add to the dashboard. In the more complex side, when we get into user permissions, then you can decide, well, for this particular role in the business, these are the widgets we need by default on the dashboard for those users. But these are fairly simple. And another element that is quite useful, which you build your workflow boards. So you can see here, I've got companies as a workflow board, and I've got Irwin. I can see some other details here as well. And I can then, again, I've got that same menu structure that really lives all over Macanta. We keep with the same menu structure. I can go and I can now see the contact, or I can open up the company details, and I can then see who's got relationships with the company. And then again, I've got that full menu there. But this then allows me to move here. And how the workflow board works is, if we go into the workflow board builder, let's go for companies that we just looked at. And here we're saying that our key field is company status. And it's then, that's a multi-select field. And then whatever the values, the options are in that field, is then the columns. That represents our columns. So if we go back to here, we can see we've got these columns here. And if I go and find here the, which one is it? Company status, those options in that field, because I set that as the key field, that's now my columns that I can move along, and I can then say, okay, they're not a client anymore. Irwin's moved along, we've done the work. Same thing with opportunities, and you can build as many of these as you like. But now, whilst at first glance it looks the same, that's a company record, and this is an opportunity record, and you'll see our columns have changed as well. So we have the option to go in and access that in the same way. And then just to quickly whiz through the admin side, app details just gives you your app name and your API key. Query builder, we've just gone through. Blast progresses, if you go on here and you send an email to a widget or multiple widgets, that triggers a blast email, or a broadcast email, as it's also called. And this here will show you the progress out of so many, how many have sent, how long did it take to send all of them eventually, and you've got a whole history of these broadcast emails that might have been sent. Look and feel is where you set your logo and your primary color for the app. Custom tabs is where you can, to a large extent, embed almost anything into an additional tab, depending on, so iframes, anything like that, images, videos. So if I just hop over to this app and show you then I've got here a shared calendar that's embedded into a custom tab. So this is just a Google Calendar that's been embedded into a custom tabs, which is, you do it here, and then you can decide, am I embedding a picture, a video, a calendar, a web form, some data that you pull in from somewhere else. We sometimes do it with Google Data Studio, where we build the data report and then we put it in the custom tab, so you can access it all in one place for that. And the only restriction on that really is the source, because some source providers or sources don't allow cross-domain loading, and that's essentially what you're doing when you're embedding it there, because you're loading it under the app's domain. Contact-to-contact relationships is where we set up parent and child, whatever those relationships might be. Excuse me. Data import and export is very self-explanatory. We've created workflow boards. The internal support email is basically where you get to set this contact support. And what that then does is, it's not very clear here because I'm looking at my own record. So if I maybe go and look at Erwin's record instead, you can see here I've gone contact support. I can add a subject and a message for an email, and it tells me, it'll tell the recipient as well that this was reported by the user, me, about the contact, Erwin. And that's just a way for your team to easily notify on an email address that you specify if there's anything wrong, if they look at data and they're not quite sure about this contact, is something missing, are they not sure, they can reach out to you that way. So that is where you set that up. The object builder is where we create the objects. So I'll go through this briefly, where the first thing you do is you set your relationships and you just decide, okay, in my business, in this one, we're dealing with companies and opportunities. What are the possible relationships that people could have with either a company or an opportunity? So we've got the accounts, administration, the buyer, the client, key contact, prospect, sales manager, sales rep, all those. And then we go in and we build our data object, where we can then go and say, okay, out of all the relationships in my business, which ones relate, in this instance, to companies? And then I can set limitations around that. And then I go in and then I build my interface essentially, and I can add sections, I can add subsections, and then I add all the fields. So you get to build the structure and adding fields, deciding what the field type needs to be, any of those options. And then lastly, you go to your display settings and you say, well, okay, when I search for that type of object, what fields do I want to see in the results, and any display conditions around that. And then the last two items here, user management and automation. So we'll look at automation in a moment, referring back to the if this, then that side. These two are in the process of being migrated over to this new interface. And it's not just a new interface design, it's actually on a new tech stack on the front end, which is why for both user management, there's this open unit user management and a video of me explaining that we're busy migrating it, because that then takes you through, it auto logs you in on the old interface. And you'll see most of what you can do in Macanta, you can't do in the old interface anymore, because we don't want you to use it for anything other than the elements that we've not migrated yet. So you'll see we've marked it this way to just say, hey, it's in the new interface. But you'll see that user management is here and automation is here in the old interface. So quickly looking at the if this, then that element of the automation. So you can see here, and I always encourage people to name their trigger conditions, the if side, and their trigger actions, the then side, so that they can complete the sentence, if this, then that. So you can see here, if next action due is today, then create the next action task. If inquiry date not set, then set inquiry date today. So it just makes it easy to keep track of what's doing what, where, and then to just go in. So if we start here, trigger condition is basically if you can describe to someone sitting next to you in the office when something should happen, you're building a trigger condition and you can describe it to Macanta. So if you say, well, okay, you might say to someone sitting next to you, if this contact doesn't get back to us in the next couple of days, get a reminder so that you give them a call. Well, you can tell Macanta to do that in very much the same way. So if we go and look at our trigger condition, that next action due, for example, what we've got is we're saying the next action due, we're just giving it a name. It relates to opportunities because it's the data object that drives the automation. It's not the contact. The contact is just carrying along for tasks and emails and the like, but it's the data object that triggers in combination with this relationship. So we're saying it's opportunities and the relationship is key contact. And then we're just saying opportunity field conditions. If the next action due, that next action date is, and you can just use English, say today, then it will meet the criteria. I'll come back to restart after in a moment because that's a slightly complicated discussion perhaps. But if we then go and look at when our task is created, we create next action task, we can see here again we've got opportunities and we've got the key contact. We're not setting any field values, but we do have this task, assign contact action, create next action task, loaded in here. So what that allows you to do is you can either update data values in the data object, or you can take other actions like sending an email, or we can send an SMS if there was one. We can do calculations with field actions, assign notes and tasks, in-app notifications, and also send information to external pieces of software via webhooks that we can do there. So I sort of think of these as payloads onto the trigger action. So you set your action and then it's almost a case of if this, then that, and also, and you do these extra things. So all of those extra payload items are then just created under their own section. So we've got email, there's no webhook here, but if I were to create one, then again, I set where am I sending it, what URL, what data object type, with what relationship, and then what values do I want to pass on, either data object values in the system or special custom key value pairs. Emails, you go in and you build the email that you want, and you can then load that in. Same with SMS, nothing set up here, but it's the same setup. Field actions, again, there's a collection of actions, addition, like calculations you can make. You can work out how long it is since a particular date, difference between two dates, humanize. There's different functions you have here to manipulate the data with these field actions. Contact actions, it's for notes and tasks, and then user actions is for internal notifications, which show up in the notification center here for your users for that. So I said I'd go back to the restart after element and just cover that quickly. So basically it allows you to set almost as an additional condition whether this automation, if the data object meets the criteria, whether it should run again or not. So you can put in here, there must be one here perhaps. Of course, I now won't find one. Here we go. So here we've said never. That's just typed in, by the way. So we've said never. So what will happen here is this condition where opportunity stage is closed won or closed lost in this instance. for the particular contact that triggers with the data object item that triggers the automation, it won't run again. So we log in the database in the backend, in the bells of all this, we log that that automation has run for the pairing of the contact and the data object. So not one or the other, but the specific pairing, this contact with this data object, this trigger action, this condition has been met and has been processed. And because the restart after says never, it won't run again. So if we then come and look at something like this, where it says 1 day, so we're saying the rule is the next action date is today, okay? So just as we clock over into midnight, the system will scan and say, now there's a data object, an opportunity here with Erwin, where the next action date is today. So it will then trigger the automation, but it will then not trigger it again because, of course, the next action date for Erwin will still be today, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, an hour later. It's still today because no one's going to change the date. But we're saying don't ignore it, basically, for a day. Don't restart it for a day. So you can see what will happen is it runs it and then ignores it for a day. And then when it gets to the next day, the next action date on that opportunity isn't today anymore. If no one's changed it, it'll now be yesterday, and therefore it doesn't meet this criteria. Should you complete the task on the day and then set a new next action date as tomorrow, then tomorrow it will be picked up. And that's how you can have that you can say, well, okay, with what frequency should something like this happen? There are some things where we just want it to happen once and never again. Other things we want it to happen. It could happen once a day because I can do the task, the next action, and then set a new date for tomorrow. And I want it to run again tomorrow and generate the task for me. I don't want it to think, well, it ran yesterday, so we're ignoring it. So you can have it that way, that it runs with any frequency, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, a month, 1 year. It just depends on the requirement for you. And then, of course, if the criteria changes on the data object, then it won't work. So let's say, for instance, I've set a next action date for tomorrow, but during the course of today, you get in touch with me and we agree to speak next week. I can update that date to next week. Come tomorrow, this condition won't meet anymore because I've changed the date. But come next week on the date that I set it, it will run. So it gives you that kind of control rather than contacts sitting behind time as waiting to run and for actions to take place. So that's how the automation really works. You do have the option also to put in delays. So you can say, okay, if the next action is today, wait however many minutes, hours, days, weeks, or months, and then you can say run it at a specific time. These are all optional. It's not all of them. It's not an all or nothing. You can run it at a particular time, and then you can also revalidate the trigger condition by checking this box. And what that will do is, let's say, for instance, you say, okay, when this condition is met, wait 4 hours and then perform this particular action. By using the revalidate option, at the end of those 4 hours, Macanta will check, does the data still meet the criteria of the original trigger condition? If it does, it'll process the action. If it now doesn't meet the criteria anymore, it won't process the action because you've asked it to revalidate the condition before running. So that's if you use longer delays. If it's a minute or 5 minutes, then it doesn't really make sense. But if it's a time period where the data could change, and if the data changes, you don't want the action to be taken anymore, then that's quite a useful setup to have there. So that's a very short overview of the automation. And I'll now just look at user management briefly, because that's you can go quite deep into that. So we've only got one user template here, and that's our admin template that's in place when you sign up. But you can create your own. When you add users, you can create your own user templates. So I'll just quickly show you, and I apologize, I'm going to go between this screen and this screen so that I can tell you what these things relate to. For that, so the tab access, read only or read write, is all about, if I go over here, these tabs here. So every time you create a data object type, these tabs appear, and you then have the option to say, can someone see that tab at all? And if they can see it, can they see the data within it as a read write or a read only? And then you also have these last two options, which is hiding this button or hiding that button. If you're in a scenario where you don't want people to manually add data objects, they should only deal with stuff that comes in via a webhook or an API or something, then you can hide these buttons so that they can't add additional in. So then we go into the data object sections, which is really just the next sort of resolution down from the tabs. So this then relates to, if I go here to companies and I open this one up, we've only got company info here as a tab. But if I go to opportunities, I've got general, display section 1, display section 2, display section 3. And here I've got the option again for those. So do I have to that? So I can have read-write access to opportunities, but you can say for this section here, I've got read-only access, and this section 2, I can't see at all. And you control that with the section access here. Moving on to MQB access, which is the Macanta query builder. So when you build widgets for the dashboard, you can control here again, do I see the results of that widget as read only or read write? And then is it in my dashboard by default? And do I have the ability to send batch emails? Because you may have users in your organization where they need to work with this data, but you don't want them to be able to send. If you've got a list of 2,000 people in a widget, not everyone in the business should be able to send an email to those 2,000 people. So that's how you can control whether they have the ability to send batch emails or not. Task access. By default, you only see your own tasks. You can choose that the user, when they log in, they can see everyone's tasks. So they'll then have access to multiple widgets for everyone's tasks with the other users' names. Or you can say, for your role, I need you to also see the tasks of, and then you'll have a list of the other users. So you can have a sales manager that can see the tasks of all the sales staff, but he doesn't need to see the task of admin or another role in the business. So you can control, and you can create as many of these permission templates as you need to do that. So then we've got inline template access. Now there's none set up in this app, but if you were to go to send an email here, we can create a template or we can use a template, and we can set those templates in groups. And then the permission templates then gives you control over, well, who's got access to those template emails. Because again, the sales manager might have templates that the sales reps don't have, and you don't necessarily need them to have access to all those. And then you've got customer service who would have different templates and not access to the sales templates. So in that scenario, you would create a sales manager permission template, a sales rep permission template, and a customer service permission template, and then assign that to the different roles. Contact view permissions is who and what can I see, and this is basically where you say, okay, you can see everything, but it's read only, all contacts and data objects, or it's read write. And then you have the option to say, okay, you can see read write for contacts with which the user shares a data object. So if I'm the sales rep on a particular opportunity, I can see that opportunity and that contact with read-write permissions. But someone who doesn't have a relationship with a data object will either not see it, or they'll see it as read-write, which is what you can configure here. And that's configured on a per data object type basis. So you can see it's quite granular that we go into it for that control. Then user guides. This is where, if I pop into this other app, you'll see here we've got these blue question marks at different places in the interface. And that's the user guides that allow you to add instructions. So you can use your Macanta system to train your team on how to use the system. And you have access, the overall global ones as part of the template, and you can have different settings, for different instructions for different team roles, for sales manager, sales rep, admin, customer service. You can give them different information depending on what they need, but you can even then, when you go into the data object builder, I don't think it's here, but if I go in here, you'll see that this goes even down to the per field level. So I can put different instructions on the sections, and even down to the fields. I can embed instructions to train the team and explain, well, why is this a required field, or what happens here if I'm in tracking, what information is it that's in tracking. So that is your guides, and you can see you've got the general interface, the sidebar tabs, the data object sections, and then the per field ones is in the actual object builder. When you add a field, you can add the user guide here, and that'll give you that field level instruction. Workflow boards, you decide, do I see it at all? And if I do see it, is it showing me all the cards, or only the cards that me as a logged in user has a relationship with? And then we've got an ever growing, and this is part of our migration to the new tech stack, is to make this more intuitive, because obviously as functionality is added, we add additional things. So allow users to attach files to data objects, yes or no. Allow them to delete the attachment, yes or no. Allow them to delete a data object, allow them to delete a contact, allow them to merge duplicate contacts, allow them to sync their email inboxes, allow them to add or remove email domain filters for the sync, allow them to export contacts, allow them to add a direct relationship or not. That's on the contact, the direct relationships. Allow them to export notes and tasks, allow them to export data objects. And then also the user data edit permissions. If a user is connected to a data object, can they see it as read-write? And can they change the relationships or not? So that's quite a few granular bits that we've added on that'll, in the new interface, will be a lot more intuitive. So yeah, so that's where the user management and automation takes place, which is where the videos and this link directs you to. And if you get lost with it, the only difference is it's the same URL as your app normally is. So this one's xj183.macantacrm.app, and here it's just .com. So it's the same URL, but .com instead of .app, and it's your same login details that if you want to quickly get into here, that gets you there. So I think that's pretty much it. The other thing I didn't touch on is the advanced search, which is very much like the query builder. It's just for on the fly. Well, I don't want to build a query. I just quickly want to see things, so I can go and say where the opportunity stage is not an inquiry, and the let's see, and the reason one is not null. and then you can and that'll then show you the results, and then you've got the option: do you want to save it as a widget, a new widget, or do you just want to export that list? Do you just want to email that list, or do you just want to work with that list and find what you're looking for? And that's then beyond just the standard term search that you would use anywhere. So I think with that, I've come to the end of what I had in mind to show you. There's obviously lots and lots of detail and particular use cases, but I try to just give you an overview of how we think and how to look at Macanta, and then a small sample of what is possible and where these things live throughout the interface. So, yeah. Any questions? Someone is typing. Thanks, David. You have a few. Please fire away. What is the gorilla? The basketball court or the gorilla game? It is the basketball. And I'm assuming you mean the 3 people dressed in black, 3 people dressed in white. It's a reminder to me for the bits when we are very focused, but what are we not seeing? And you can't see it, it's off camera, but on the other wall, there's a quote from a very good friend of mine who posed the question in a mastermind meeting of, can you solve a different problem? And it's just, sometimes we are so stuck on the thing we're trying to fix, we don't realize that if we fix something else, the original problem goes away. What's our number 1 business segment? So like your main customers. It is quite broad, and I imagine that's by and large because we haven't niched down. We have quite a lot of success in legal stroke claims management because it's this process. And it's sort of the best way that I can put it is that Macanta works really well in businesses where there is a process to follow and it actually matters that the process is followed, because lots of businesses want to have automation and processes and workflow and things like that, but once they get it, it's then, oh, but what about this, and my business is different, and no, we don't do it like that, John does it differently from this person or that person, and then it falls over. Works well for accountants as well, because to a large extent their sort of compliance workflow is dictated to them by the authorities. But then we've got electrical contractors, and we have, trying to think what others we've got a few of. It's quite varied. Coaching businesses. So yeah, quite broad at the moment. We're still deciding what to niche and how that niching should look. So the more process driven, the better the fit. Makes sense. Yeah, because it's you can have it just to as a extremely fancy address book. You can have that and not implement the workflow boards or the data dashboard widgets or the automation. But then for my money, it just feels as if you're using the wrong tool, I would say, because if it's just a fancy address book that you're just storing data in and updating every now and again, then there are far simpler tools, I would say, available. That simpler in that they don't need much configuration. How good would it be for an insurance agency financial advisory practice? It's quite interesting. We're currently talking to 2 or 3 of those, and it seems a really good fit, especially because, like an insurance agency, the intake forms, the amount of data that they have to collect, um, and then process, and it drives a process and things like that. That works really well, and especially the fact, because we've got this relationship data object structure, of course, I come to you for insurance, and if all you have is contact with custom fields, when I come next year to renew, you have to overwrite that data or store it somewhere else. Whereas in our setup, you would just create another intake form and gather the details and drive the automation and everything you need to do for the next year's insurance. And then, of course, you can then send reminders for policy renewals and everything, because well, you're insuring, let's say for example, you're insuring my 2 cars, my house, my holiday home. They would have different renewal dates and different requirements at different times, and because there'll be discrete data objects driving automation, you can get quite complex and efficient with that, and go quite far with it. How did I go from music to building a CRM? I went via being a labourer on building sites, training as an electrical contractor, setting up my own business, and using some of the principles in this. I was using Infusionsoft in my own business, and then that business failed, closed that down, and I was sort of looking up, thinking this was 2014. What do I do next? So I started out as a Infusionsoft consultant, because I thought, well, that's a skill that I've picked up. I've had enough of crawling around lofts and building sites. So I started working with that, and then actually one of the original founder of Macanta. Macanta started life as an add-on for Infusionsoft, and I grabbed onto that and started using that with clients. And then myself and my brother and co-founder Jean joined forces with Peter Daly-Dixon, who originally had the idea for Macanta as the add-on. And we worked together because we ended up working with a lot of the same customers. So we set up business together, and then in February 2020, we actually abstracted away completely from Infusionsoft and launched Macanta as a standalone product on 24th February 2020. And it's gone on and grown from there. And that decision was made in large part because we realized we weren't solving an Infusionsoft problem, we were solving business problems. And there was lots of development and functionality that we wanted to add, that Infusionsoft had become a ball and chain, and we had to keep sort of hack onto them. So we decided to just build on our own. And certainly, I'd say almost 50% of what is in Macanta now couldn't be done as an add-on for Infusionsoft. So, but I haven't left the music entirely. I don't play anymore, but I'm fortunate to have a nice hi-fi downstairs, and I listen to music all day. Large record collection and CDs. Last two, how big is your team, and have you done funding or bootstrapped? Entirely bootstrapped. The closest we've got to funding is personal loans and putting money into Macanta, and currently we are a team of 5, 2 in the UK and 3 in the Philippines, and then we do have some developers in Colombia that we work with on a frequent basis. They're not sort of part of our team. They are a team on their own and they have their own business, but they understand and know Macanta. So quite often when we have customers who need custom development that isn't a feature in Macanta, but is something to talk into Macanta or whatever, then we use them because they understand and know the API, and they're very good and reliable. Cool, that's great. Thanks a lot. And I think with that, it is now 9 p.m. for me. So end of the day. And any other questions, just reach out via our support and we will be in touch. Thank you very much.